If anything, it upped the ante a little bit because they've been kind of relaxed a little bit in the second half. So yeah, it's that was the only small negative or like bit of caution to take away was it's how competition that can very quickly go sour.
Susie, what did the Norwegian manager or his players have to say for themselves afterwards?
Yeah, it was very much like, took it on himself, said that they're going to have to try and write this off as a sort of freak performance, that they're better than this, that, they can still qualify, that they've got to try and pick up and not let this affect them going into that last game, all the kind of stuff you would expect. But as well as him speaking for like over half an hour in the press conference, most of the Norwegian players all came out into the mix zone and spoke to the press, numerous different blocks of press as well. So Maria Barstolet came out, spoke to English press, spoke to Norwegian press, written to TV, and this, if it was the other way around, I'm not too sure that any of the players would have done it up in that way. Ada Hegerberg doing loads of press, Maren Mjelde, the captain, and other centre-backs doing loads of press. And that really impressed me. There was real sort of owning of the result, wanting to come out and talk about it and confront it. And Ada Hegerberg said it was completely unacceptable. Not exactly the probably return to international football she was hoping for. That surprised me because if it was the other way around, there's no way that as many England players would come to the mix zone, if any at all, and be quite so willing and ready to talk after such a brutal defeat.
Lars Tillotson tweeting last night, our Norwegian friend, saying that fully funded and functioning public services, you'll never see that. That was all he had by the end. He texted me and he did say, I'm allowed to say it, the worst Norwegian performance in this country since the last time I tried to walk down some stairs, which when he broke his ankle. We wish him the best. Of course, he'll be on the pod soon. Mr. Sleepy does say, and we kind of touched on it, but he says, I understand it's a different panel, but in the last episode, you discussed how big scores of 7/8 were bad, not just for the tournament, for the women's game as a whole in relation to potential scores against Northern Ireland. How do people feel about it now? Is it different, Nikki, because this is a bit more like Germany 7, Brazil 1 in the semi-final of 2014. This is two good sides and one has just hammered the other, and this is not a mismatch.
Yeah, I think it's it's bothering me a little bit that there's been a few, right? So if I go back to last year, as you didn't have this number of results that have been this wide. Obviously, I have personal perspective on this. I've been watching Italy with all sorts of optimism. A few, that's it. I've completely lost track of time. My sense of time is completely gone. But was it one day before two days before? Either
no
way,
one knows. It's fine.
I was watching Italy get walloped by France. I think sort of coming with a reason amount of optimism, and there have been a few Birmingham 8-0s, but there have been a few 4-goal results in this group stage, and it does feel like there's a bit of a wider gap this time around between haves and have-nots than perhaps in some previous tournaments, and especially when you look at, again, in Italy, below Norway in the sort of expectations, but a team that would have certainly had expectations to go somewhere in this tournament, and Norway very much had expectations to go somewhere in this tournament. And it's a little bit bothersome, but I think certainly as a one-off result, you shouldn't be ruling this one-off game, because I also, by the way, still wouldn't rule out at all Norway to go through the group and end up making some noise in the knockout rounds. I think even Ada Hegerberg was saying afterwards, to some extent, you sort of, at a certain point in that game, you almost mentally put a fork in it and say, well, this is over, and you start thinking about, well, what can we do to fix this? We don't fix it in this 90 minutes, we fix it in the next game coming up.
Lord Sugar sent a totally unsurprising Lord Sugar-like tweet saying earlier in the conference, saying, I'm watching the women's football, notice that all the commentators are women. I also note when men's football is on, there is he wrote symbolic, but I think he meant to write symbolic, female commentator to cover the broadcaster's arse. Should I complain there should be a male commentator in women's football? Very hard not to just write, oh, fuck off, Alan. But Robin Cowan's the camera panned to the panel. There are obviously two men on the panel, and Robin Cowan went over to some of our symbolic men up there. Good evening, Lord Sugar. Susie, I thought it was absolutely brilliant from Robin.
Genius, absolute genius. He's been tweeting me as well, I don't know if you've seen, he's saying, oh, it's great to see my good friend Ian Wright has made it. Perhaps the BBC have changed their mind. They'll say they would always done it from the start, of course. I mean, it's like absolutely surreal when he's like one of the biggest women's football advocates on the panel. Like, I sit with him at Barclays Player of the Month award lunches and things, and it's just like absolutely oozes love for the Arsenal team in particular, and for women's football generally. Was real vocal on the discussion about the Player of the Season award as well. So a real weird stick to try and pick up and back people with.
I really want. It was almost tempting to go on to The Apprentice, just so that when you get fired, you don't just timidly nod and go, "Thank you for the opportunity, Lord Sugar," sort of backing out of the room. You just go, "I didn't want it anyway, you massive bellend." But that's just my opinion. Nice tweet from Johnny Nicholson, friend of the pod, said, Dawn looks up, I presume Dawn is Mrs. Nicholson, says, "Is that Adrian Childs when John Armour-Reeser is on the screen?" And now, most importantly, Susie, you played the Norwegian press earlier in the day. How did it go?
Absolutely disastrously. So we lost 4-0, right? But I'm going to take that as a win, because we had the most slapdash group of 10 players that you can imagine in mismatched kit that we pulled together last minute. And they had pretty much a full squad of 23 elite athletes. It seemed like he showed up and there were just like rippling abs absolutely everywhere, and you're thinking, what the hell have we got ourselves in for? And they had been being trained by a top coach before they actually came out to the tournament. Had a player in their team who has 183, I want to say, caps for the Norwegian women's team, and could have legitimately been on the pitch and perhaps probably should have had a performance. And there's another heavily capped Norwegian women's international, and then at least one men's second division player. So 4 goals conceded, 3 from set pieces, mainly to their 6'8" tall centre back. So I think we did all right. We also had to borrow a player who we think maybe had an English grandma somewhere down the line that could join our ranks to make up our numbers. And obviously we didn't have loads of substitutions until they loaned us a couple more in the second half, so that we could actually breathe in the ridiculously high temperatures.
Sounds like a lot of excuses here.
Basically, we won, is what I'm saying. It was a 4-0 victory rather than defeat. I feel.
When do we start getting concerned about these big score lines and what it means about the standard of media football?
I mean, it wasn't great.
I remember you creating one of those, Max, before the Champions League final in Kiev.
It was in Kiev, yeah, and we will name no names, Barry, but when ex-pros say you've never played the game, you understand.
Yeah.
For some journos there, I was going, God, I'm not sure you should be writing about this. If that's the level. Well, they were very hungover, to be fair, but they did have. They were managed by Shevchenko, and they had a couple of Ukrainian internationals in centre mids, and that was quite tough. Sid Lowe had a good touch, and and Rory Smith did some quite good work, but it was tough going on that particular morning.
I don't know, Max Shevchenko didn't even win a single game in charge of Genoa, so they can't be that good, obviously.
No, you're right. Yes, Harry?
Oh, no, I was just going to say that there were 2 players in particular you singled out as being outstandingly useless. I was quite tickled by it.
Anyway. I also, speaking of the heat, Susie, I enjoyed the UEFA Women's Euro 2022 official ticketing Twitter page saying, due to prolonged high temperatures across the UK, fans will be permitted to bring a single clear disposable water bottle up to 500 millilitres to the remaining group stage matches. Bottle lids will be removed by stewards upon entry to the stadium. Wow, was it Johnny Johnson? With this, you are spoiling us. With this is too much, half a litre of water in 30 degrees, for God's sake.
You say this, but I remember at the Women's World Cup in 2019, right? We were told we weren't allowed, even as media, to take on in any bottled water. It had to be a fan couldn't bring in any at all, and that was 30 plus degree heat. we had to bring in the branded, like only sponsored water only. And so I had bottles of water taken off me for that reason. And then so I thought, oh, right, I'll be smart. I got a reusable bottle. I came in with that, and then that got confiscated for being metal. And I remember just like shouting at one of the stewards outside the Lyon Stadium, "I'm a journalist, not a criminal." Like desperate to get this water in. It was like 35 degrees, and we were going into the cauldron that is the Olympic Lyon Stadium.
I just love the idea that you can. I just love the idea that I know some people will throw full bottles and a player to get hit, but just the idea that people think, well, I could just bring a carafe because that's an open top, isn't it? What do they do about this? Let people drink water. It's really hot. Anyway, and it will just have like a stadium, like a cricket. No, but a cricket match.
Is throwing lids even a thing?
No, it's the full bottle, isn't it? So you throw the full bottle.
No, I know. Yeah, but they take the lids away so you can't throw them. Like, I've never known of the throwing bottle lids being a thing that is really done.
It's not you throw the bottle lid, it's that if you close the lid, then you have a full heavy weapon. And if you throw it open...
Oh, that makes so much more sense. Now I'm all for it. Wow, okay, that's the game changer. Because everyone was like sitting in the press box going, who throws lids? When is that? Why is that a thing? Why would anyone care? There's like so many things on people. But
how does the whole press box? How does not one person in the press box know that?
Maybe there was some like further down the way, but in my section of the press box anyway, we were all very, very confused by this.
Okay, well, given that intelligence doesn't seem to be as previous, here's a handy tip. Just remove the lid yourself before you get to the stewards and put it in your pocket. Then when you get past the stewards, take it out of your pocket and put it back on the bottle.
There speaks a man with Super Soaker experiences. All your water needs. But at some stadiums, some sports, they just have water stations. Like, that just seems like a really sensible idea. So people can drink water. Like, it's really good for you. Anyway, look, that'll do for part one. Part two, we'll round up the rest of the interview. Hi podcast, Max here. Football Weekly is supported by Starling Bank, a national partner of the UEFA Women's Euros 2022. Did you know Starling Bank is the only bank in the UK founded by a woman? Anne Bowden set up Starling, the UK's first digital-only bank, to disrupt an archaic industry. Incredibly, she remains the only woman in history to launch a bank in the UK. Women challenging the norm and rising up through the ranks is a familiar story at Starling, so they've partnered with UEFA to elevate women's football. With their campaign, Our Time, Starling aims to increase exposure for the women's game and ultimately help level the playing field. For example, they've created women's fantasy football game and they're offering up to 25 grants to UK-based grassroots football clubs and up-and-coming players. Starling is changing the way we bank. With almost 3 million accounts across the UK, Starling has topped the list of the UK's best customer experience companies. To get everything you know about banking, apply in minutes today. Welcome to part two of the Guardian Football Weekly. One show left on the live tour, and then we'll stop talking about it until next year's World Tour. On Wednesday, we're in Glasgow. Philippe O'Kay, Jonathan Wilson join me and Barry. Will Barry end up with you holding someone's luggage aloft and a pub full of people singing about the luggage and your name, singing your name like you're some modern day Jesus extraordinary.
I'll be honest, Max, I cannot wait for this tour to be over because I am broken.
Obviously we'll deliver on the night, but I am like a husk. I'm not designed for this sort of work, honestly.
If we were in a rock band or something, I now understand why they all become alcoholics and drug addicts.
If you couldn't make any of the shows, the Saturday night show Hackney Empire is available on demand until the 16th of July. It is worth it for Barney's story about Glenn Holland Flies, a musical finale, Ellis James's humiliating outing on the One Show, which we've been sending him the pick stills from the video of, and he just can't bear. Oh man, the story is so good. Anyway, go to myticket.co.uk, search for Guardian Football Weekly, and thanks to everyone who came. Nikki, you were there on Friday. You have a nice time in Hackney, Nikki?
I had a lovely time, yeah. I managed to lose my bloody AirPods on the way home, so that made it a bit less of a nice time. But the show itself was great.
Yeah, really fun. And Barry walked off saying that is the best show we've ever done. It was like, we're all heroes! Like this. Wonderful. Anyway, let's go through D. France 5, Italy 1. Adam says France had a good first half, didn't they, Barry? I'll go to you first, Nikki. Disappointing result for your lot.
Yeah, it was rubbish. It was rubbish. And I think, as I was saying in the first section, sort of all the more rubbish for having perhaps come into it with a bit of sort of hope and expectation. I suppose the only sort of positive to take from it from an Italian standpoint was the feeling that, unlike Norway, at least there was some sort of to fight back in the second half. The team did sort of show a bit of character. I thought it's a bit of a sort of odd Italy squad in that there's a generation of players sort of in their 30s and some of them even moving on to mid and late 30s, which I'm saying like it's old, but it clearly isn't in real life. But in football, that can be can be old. And there's a group who are sort of in their mid-20s, and it felt like in the second half some of those younger players like Piemonte came off the bench and just injected a bit of sort of fresh something into the team. And I really appreciated Piemonte in her post-game interview, her frankness, because she sort of came off the bench and scored the consolation, and she was just, she used the phrase "incazzata nera," but saying how she felt, which, you know, basically means I was effing pissed off about the whole situation. So she came into the game with that mindset and threw something at it. And yeah, I don't know. She's, you know, again, she's not that young. I think she's 24, 25. But there was something of the sort of that mindset coming into it that at least made you feel like, all right, maybe there's some fight left in this group, even though they've had a rotten result to open things up.
Susie, tell me about Grace Gaoro. So 8 goals in 6 years up until this moment, and then 3 in 36 minutes against Italy.
Yeah, I mean, she's a great player, like real good talent. I wasn't expecting her to be the star of the France team. I have to say, I was thinking that that'd be Katoto, as I think many people were. But yeah, she's been a very, very good player for Paris Saint-Germain for a while now, and I think it's got like 20 goals in 100 or so appearances for PSG, so that isn't like a top goal scorer for them either. But yeah, I think it's impressive, and I just wasn't expecting such a coherent performance from France at all, because
Don't they all hate each other?
well, yeah, there's that. The manager has caused, you know, like real sort of turmoil in the dressing room. You know, she's not hugely popular in France, very much sort of stayed in place because the France Football Federation don't seem to give much of a damn about women's football. They don't really invest hugely in the women's national team. They haven't pushed for a professional league, despite, you know, having the best team in Europe in Lyon in their ranks. They sort of just let Lyon and PSG battle out at the top and don't really care about whether the other teams are pushing them or not. So there's a real sort of standoff approach from the French Football Federation, and it's been to the detriment of the team. I mean, you've not got 2 of their best players, Eugène Sommer and Amandine Henry, who scored that absolute screaming Champions League final in this team, and it just, there was a little bit of a what if, like how good would France be if those players were involved in that tournament? And it's not like they've not ever got along with the manager, because I remember sitting in a press conference in France in 2019 where the Diac, the manager, is like real sort of dry, sarcastic replies to journalists, and Amandine Henry is sitting next to her just like trying to not cry with laughter basically at how witty the manager was being. So it isn't, I don't know how things have gone so sour there, but I mean, to say that the current crop stepped up is perhaps an understatement, but it was, I hesitate to say it when, you know, I've sort of said not the opposite about Norway, because defensively Norway were terrible, but, you know, did a great job at stopping them. But I was surprised by Italy's complete utter defensive collapse. I had them as my dark horses for the tournament. Basically, all my predictions been crap. Bar that Bethany will win the Golden Boot, which was semi a joke to her in the post-match presser after Austria.